This program on investing under regulation crowdfunding is not investment advice.
Rising with the crowd, power unbound, change makers lead where hope is found. Superpowers for good, shaping the fate. Investors and dreamers open the gate. Supercrow stands loud, proud and true, building tomorrow for me and you.
Have you ever wondered if this investment crowdfunding, impact crowdfunding stuff that Devin talks about all the time is for real, if it's legit, if it's working for people, for investors, and for entrepreneurs? Well, my guest today is the owner of the data. There's probably no one in the industry closer to the data with better access to knowing what's working and what's not. And so he's going to help answer those questions today. Stick around. You don't want to miss this. Now, welcome to the Super Crowd Presents Superpowers for Good. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and my guest today is Belley of Kingscrowd. And Brian is a dear friend and an expert in crowdfunding like nobody's business. Before I get started with Brian, I do want to just invite you all to join me for Supercrowd 25 coming up in a couple of weeks here. This is going to be an amazing event. 2 full days of content streaming for free. You can just watch it by visiting thesupercrowd25.com. Watch it there. If you register in advance, we'll give you all the details for how to watch it on television, YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever you want. Again, free to watch, but here's the special thing. We'll also be doing a VIP session, a VIP package that gives you backstage access, premier networking before, after, during the event, all kinds of great VIP perks, $25. You can't go wrong. Join us for Supercrowd 25 in a couple of weeks. Again, visit thesupercrowd25.com. Now, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Devin. Super happy to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. And I'm sorry you won't be able to join us for Supercrowd 25, but I know your boss, Chris Lestrino, will be there. We're thrilled that he'll be on the program, and I appreciate you helping us coordinate that. But Brian, you just published your half-year report on crowdfunding, and I was thrilled to see some of this data hinting at some exciting growth. Give us a recap. What did you see in the data in this first half of 2025?
Absolutely. So at Kingscrowd, we track all of the funding, that is the investment volume, and all of the entrepreneurs who are raising capital. How much capital are they raising every single day of the year? We've tracked this all the way back to 2016, and we basically report on it. So when we do our annual reports at the end of the year, we also do quarterly reports and semi-annual. So we were taking a look at all of the data for the first half of 2025. That is the first 6 months. How much investment volume, how much did investors commit to these entrepreneurs, to these founders, to these issuers to be able to support their ideas, their companies, and their projects? The numbers were actually very encouraging for this year. So over the first 6 months, over the first half of the year, there was $450 million committed to these campaigns that are being done online to these offerings. So these are security offerings, right? That means that these people, as investors, are either getting stock, you're getting equity ownership, or convertible note, or debt and revenue share opportunities. All of that is potential upside that those investors are getting. But on the other side of that coin, there's $450 million that went to these small businesses, to these entrepreneurs, to be able to help them start their business, grow their business, and create new jobs, right? All of this is to help grow these businesses where they're going to be giving back to their communities, creating value, and creating jobs. Now, in terms of the breakdown and how does that compare to, recent years? So $450 million sounds like a lot, and it is a lot of money. Now, in terms of the whole investment crowdfunding industry as a whole, there's been a little bit of a downtrend since 2021. So if we go back to 2021, that was kind of the peak year where there was over $1 billion invested in just that year, and all of these kind of retail investments being done online. So these investments are done under something called Regulation Crowdfunding, Reg CF, and Regulation A, Reg A, that you've probably heard about. But when you take a look at the split of the number this year, there was 250 million that went into those Regulation A campaigns, and about 200 of that 450 million went into Reg CF. Now, those numbers are actually, despite the kind of downtrend I mentioned since 2021, those numbers are up since 2024. And in the case of Regulation A, that even exceeded the first 6 months, even going back to 2021. So that is a huge deal, because if we all think of just what the general macroeconomic environment was, risk appetite, there was a lot of money kind of going around back in 2021. There was a lot of people investing in risk assets. And to be able to say that Reg A exceeded even the first 6 months of that year is very impressive. In addition, Reg CF was up about 9% year over year for those first 6 months compared to 2024. So overall, if you take these numbers, the 450 million, extrapolate it out to the end of the year, we at Kingscrowd are actually projecting that the investment crowdfunding kind of online retail private markets will end the year probably at over $900 million invested. So that will exceed basically all of these most recent few past years, going back to that 2021 peak where there was over $1 billion raised. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons for this, and we can get into some of the discussion, Devin, around just other nuances in the trends and, what some of the happening is around that. But I'll turn it back over to you real quick, just for a little perspective.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is really exciting. And I would point out that I think you're being very reasonable. I won't call it conservative to say, okay, we're going to get to 900 million this year, potentially. But I would also say that's very reasonable. It seems to me that when we're talking about 900 million and a record of 1.03 billion, that we are in a situation where a big second half could put us in a position to be the biggest year ever in this marketplace. How crazy is it to think about that? Am I just nuts to even talk about that? What do you think? Can we get there?
Not at all. Let's rewind 6 months and just think of where were we at the beginning of this year, 2025, right? So we raised 450 million, but what was that done under? If we go back to April of this year, there was a lot of market volatility, right? The S&P 500, so the public markets were almost down 20% from kind of their peak of starting the year. And there was a lot of uncertainty just around policy, around, tariffs and different things. And what does uncertainty do? It causes people to be a little bit more cautious, to kind of pull back and be, a little bit more thinking about their investments with more rigor, and perhaps holding back some dollars because of an uncertain future. So you could look at it for those first 6 months as we actually raised 450 million in spite of all of that was going on. And if there is more regulatory clarity, if there is a little less uncertainty in the back half of the year, in addition to if we get some of these bigger campaigns, typically the Regulation A campaigns can raise up to $75 million per year. If there's one or two of those, that's a huge, huge impact on the industry as a whole, both from an awareness perspective and from the capital investment volume perspective. So you are not at all crazy, Devin, thinking that if a few things do go kind of the right way, we could exceed those 2021 peak numbers that we saw for sure.
I love Reg A and Reg CF because they allow ordinary folks who aren't accredited investors, aren't wealthy, to participate. What I tend to love about Reg CF, though, is that the minimums tend to be lower, more accessible to more people. Because the reality is, if you're an ordinary working human being, like so many of us are, right? Coming up with $1,000 to plunk down into a deal is a challenge, right? If you went to an Ivy League school and you work on Wall Street, coming up with $1,000 to put into a deal, no problem. But a nurse in Topeka, a high school coach in California, they're not going to come up with $1,000 so easily. What do you see as the trend in just, if we isolate Reg CF, what are we seeing there in terms of trends?
Yeah. So interestingly, despite Reg CF going up over the first 6 months about 9% again, so raised about that $200 million in the first half of 2025. The number of offerings, so the number of issuers, actually went down a little bit since the first half of 2024. So it was more capital being invested in fewer companies. Now, you could take that a couple different ways, right? So it could be that there are some more successful companies coming into Reg CF, which is one of the trends that we see. So there were 6 Reg CF companies in the first half of the year that started since January 1st, closed before the first half of the year, and they raised more than $3 million. So, a half dozen companies in less than 6 months, several of them in much less time than that, raised millions of dollars from their crowd of investors and from a lot of times complete strangers. Now, in addition to that, right, we are seeing, I think, more companies that tend to have a little bit more traction and being some more well-known names, also potentially drawing in new investors to these markets. So because of that, the kind of average amount raised has gone up a little bit, where the issuers are raising a little bit more on average than they were back in 2024 when there was more offerings, so more companies out there, but they raised less money and in aggregate. In addition to that, we continue to see very strong kind of trends. And as you mentioned, the minimum check size can go down as low as like $50, $100 for some of these deals. The average investment size, check size as we refer to it, does tend to be in that $1,000 to $1,200 range. So there's a lot of people who are making those smaller investments, and there's a lot of investors, but there are some bigger investors out there as well who are investing in these companies. And I think that shows, some of the conviction that some of these investors have towards the deals and some of the interest, both from the retail investors, the everyday investors, which is one of the things that's so amazing about this industry, but also that these are viable investment opportunities that larger investors, institutional investors, some venture capitalists, some larger angels are also writing bigger checks towards. And I think that has been a continued encouraging trend that we are also seeing.
Yeah, it is interesting to see the smart money, as we sometimes call it, the people who write bigger checks. I'm not sure they're really smarter, but that's what we often call that money. And, there is more and more of that showing up in the Reg CF space. Now, Brian, as you look back over the kind of the history of crowdfunding, now you've got access to the most data of anybody just about. So, what are the big picture macro things that you're seeing and thinking about as a result of what you saw this last half a year?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So there are definitely cycles in investment trends, in risk appetites that we have tracked over the years. Now, as an industry as a whole, right, when it was getting started in 2016, it was tiny, like tens of millions of dollars invested in. 2017, a little bit of an increase. 2018 started getting bigger. It wasn't really until that 2020 and 2021 when there were these hundreds of millions of dollars being raised. And I think at that point in time, it was new to a lot of people. And I think a lot of people as investors were coming in and saying, cool, I can invest in startups. I can support small businesses in my community, different types of entities that they couldn't invest in before, which was awesome. However, I will say, then 2022, 2023, kind of that market correction came. A lot of companies, not just these investment crowdfunding companies, but venture capital companies, public companies saw corrections where, the valuations were going down. Some businesses were starting to shut down. And because of that, I think we saw a little bit of hesitation from investors who were getting in those earlier timeframes through 2020 and 2021. Totally understandable, right? If you start seeing that companies are starting to close their doors, it can be a little bit scary, and you're a little bit hesitant to deploy capital and invest in companies in those situations. However, I think what we have been seeing in 2024 and now 2025 is that it's kind of that inversion of that trend where things are starting to go back up and to the right again. So there are some of these stronger issuers, the companies coming back with the entrepreneurs with really solid businesses, with lots of revenues, with solid financials, with great business plans. In addition, the investor demand, I think, is coming back. So we are seeing, as I mentioned, an increase in volume year over year. And what that's telling us is that investors are coming back to this market, and that it's not just that people were investing in times that were maybe a little bit riskier in 2021, but that there have been those stalwart investors who invested throughout the whole time evenly, and now more people are coming back. And that's the thing to keep in mind. As an investor, right? Your investments, you're going to see the ones that don't do that well, or maybe unfortunately have to close down, which it is a risky investment. So that's going to happen to some of your investments. Those all happen early, right? That's going to be the ones that happen in the first 1 or 2 years. You can't get discouraged by that, because the ones that are going to be successful, success takes a little bit longer to happen. And I think we are starting to get to the tail end of that now, where we're seeing some companies that are having successful outcomes for their investors and for the companies themselves. And so we're getting a little bit of that reinvigoration. So it's a very positive note from our perspective in terms of that end.
Yeah, it is exciting. Listen, we've got to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk to you about this Newsmax offering that you highlighted in your report, because I think that's an interesting case. Now, let me just remind everyone, you can get Brian's report. It's an amazing, important report at s4g.biz/king, s4g.biz/king. So just use that short link. Obviously, it's a Kingscrowd destination, but that short link will redirect you. If you have any problem with that, just visit kingscrowd.com and look at the newsletter there, and you'll be able to find it. But Brian, we'll see you in a minute. We'll just take a quick break.
Download a free copy of How to Make Money with Impact Crowdfunding, the book Sarah Hanks describes as
a fantastic overview, not just of crowdfunding investing, but of investing in general.
Andrew Savickas raved,
"This book offers unparalleled insights for anyone looking to make a difference."
Scan the QR code to get your copy. Supercrowd 25, where innovation meets impact.
18 hours of live content, 5 platforms, 1 global audience.
Join the largest event for regulated investment crowdfunding. Live pitches, expert panels, real change.
August 21st and 22nd.
Scan the code or visit thesupercrowd25.com to register free today.
Struggling to raise capital for your business? Unlock the power of the crowd with AI. My free guide, Crowdfunding Made Simple, walks you through every step to success. Get funded smarter, faster. Scan the QR code now for your free download.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here today with Brian Belley, one of the leading experts on especially the data and understanding the marketplace for regulation crowdfunding and regulation A+ kinds of deals. We've been looking at, talking about his half-year report that was just published by Kingscrowd recently. You don't want to miss this discussion. We've been talking about the macro data. We're going to now drill down on one of the most significant offerings of the first half of the year. We're going to talk a little bit about the Newsmax offering that raised $75 million and served as essentially an IPO. This is a fascinating deal, so stick around. You don't want to miss this discussion. Brian, this Newsmax deal was pretty significant. There haven't been a lot of deals that maxed out the Reg A offering limit of $75 million. It's happened before, I think, right? You tell me. But this one, it is kind of a rare, special, exciting thing to see happen. Why do you think this offering was so successful?
Yeah. So a bunch of different things can lead to the success of an offering, right? A lot of it may have to do with, do you have an existing community of customers, of followers, and audience that you can reach out to? And I think that was one of the big things that Newsmax had, is this brand that a lot of people were familiar with, that they aligned with, and that they wanted to invest in, right? So that's one of the potential things. Now, in addition to just having an existing audience, obviously companies can still find success in their offerings if they do really well spreading the word, getting the word out there. Now, something very unique with the Newsmax offering, right, is this ability where it was kind of this pre-IPO offering, where the shares that were purchased were essentially then kind of uplisted. So they were kind of listed on a public exchange exchange after the Reg A offering, and they then became tradable. So that's one of the things you can do with Regulation A shares, a little bit different than kind of the mechanics and logistics of Reg CF. And that's one of the unique things that this platform has done before, which is so Digital Offering was the lead kind of managing selling agent for this. I believe they also engaged with a few other dealers like Dealmaker, as a familiar name for people in the industry, helped to sell these securities. And through that partnership, they were able to get just this overwhelming interest in these shares. And I will say, if you look at least at the public stock price, what happened kind of after the IPO day, if those investors were able to sell, they did pretty well there for a little while. Now, granted, I think that every stock's going to be volatile after IPO, so you can't just claim that you're going to sell at the top or try and sell at the top. And a lot of investors are in this for the long runs; they want to hold on. But in this case, it was that unique situation where you weren't investing in a company that may have something happen much further down the line, where you hope to get acquired in a couple of years, hope to IPO in 7 to 10 plus years. This was a company that those shares were listed very soon after the offering, and then were actually freely tradable, which is very different than a lot of the other ones that we've seen.
That is an important factor, and it's hard to overstate the value of that, because investors want to get their money back out. It's also exciting, right? I think the early trading happened in Newsmax at it was like 10 or 20x the offering price on those Reg A shares. Now that quickly came down. I haven't checked to see where it is today, but it came down pretty dramatically. But still, I think the Reg A investors did well, didn't they?
Yep. Depending again, and there's always going to be long-term investors who are in it for the long term. But if you look at what may have occurred, there definitely was up for a good amount there.
Yeah. Were there other offerings that you felt like were notable? Especially, I'm curious about Reg CF offerings that got close to that $5 million limit. What did you see?
Yeah, we saw a number of Reg CF offerings that had a lot of success, and some of them were also past issuers who had done successful raises in the past. So on Republic, I'll note this as well. Of the 11 companies that raised more than 3 million just in the first half of the year, those 11 companies were spread across 10 unique different funding platforms, which I thought was fascinating. So that's showing you that these companies are finding success not just with one or two of the big leaders, but they're really using a wide variety of the different funding platforms, funding portal options, broker dealers that are out there. And I think really broadening their potential audience that they were getting in front of. So talking about Reg CF, on Republic, Eli Roth's The Horror section, I wasn't as familiar with that. I believe it may have been a film kind of media related investment, but that definitely, I believe, had a huge community and did very well. On Equifund, which is one of the platforms, there was Eagle Energy Metals Corp, which raised, I believe, $5.1 million. And then on Net Capital, Avadain. So Avadain is a company that has done some fundings in the past on Reg CF, and I believe as well Reg A. And they came back and had very strong performance also with $5 million for a raise. In addition to that, Miso Robotics, another name I think a lot of people are probably familiar with just a lot of the innovations happening around robotics. There's a lot of interest in that. And also, they're a company and a name that I think has done this a bunch of times. So they kind of have the playbook down for raising capital, for getting investor interest. One other one I'll just point out as interest for Reg CF is Gigastar. So Gigastar is actually one of these funding platforms where you can invest in creators, right? So you can invest in YouTube creators who are essentially selling kind of revenue share tokens in their business. So if you have an influencer or someone that you follow that does one of these offerings on Gigastar, that can be a very popular method for raising capital pretty quickly, because again, you already have that really large engaged audience. And so Gigastar still, I believe, has their campaign going on WeFunder. And so they're raising on another platform just because of some of the interesting nuances of the way the regulations work. But I thought that one was another very interesting Reg CF. And it's always good to see, the funding platforms themselves showing that, they're eating their own dog food, right? They're out there, they're raising capital, so they understand then the product that they are providing to these companies and entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah. Now, Brian, I want to keep going for like 4 more hours, but our time is wrapping up. Let me invite you to take a minute and tell people how they can get the report, how they can what other things Kingscrowd can do, especially for investors and entrepreneurs, and how they can get in touch with you. And you've got about 60 seconds for that.
All right. Well, the link you posted before works great. So you can go to that s4g.biz/king, King. There's that link. So you can definitely get the report there. In addition, if you just head over to kingscrowd.com, we have a free newsletter. So make sure you sign up for that newsletter where we give a lot of these great data-driven insights every single week. We usually do a deal review or two. So we will be reviewing some of the open opportunities, saying what we like about the deals, what we don't, showing some of the risks and some of the potential upside. We also have a podcast. So we have a couple different podcasts. We have Inside Startup Investing, hosted by our CEO and founder, Chris Lustrino, where he interviews all of these different founders who are doing a lot of these offerings. And then I host the Kingscrowd podcast, which is a data-driven weekly podcast where we have a little investment committee. We get together, a little kind of advisory group, and we kind of just think about and talk about different trends in the online private markets, capital raising, investing, different things in the news and related to that. So Kingscrowd, we also offer some great portfolio tracking tools. We have all of the deals that are listed across all of the platforms. So if you just want one place to go to and be able to figure out, I want to see deals that match my filter, we are a great resource for that. But I want to thank you, Devin, for having me on again today. And again, head over to kingscrowd.com where you can definitely learn more and sign up for free.
All righty. Hey, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We love the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Devin. Likewise.
All righty. Now let's do some good.